Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mellow Monday. Well, no, actually it's Testy Tuesday, but we're going to do one of those duets again with Mellow Monday and Testy Tuesday put together. And I think I owe it to you to explain why this is happening. This is the second time I'm doing it, and it's not going to be the last time. Many of you know that we have a grandson who's undergoing cancer treatments. And so we have to make frequent trips to Rochester. It's an hour, a little over an hour out there and a little hour back. Sometimes they're very, very, very early in the morning and they're all day events. So on occasion, I'm going to have some duets where I'm melding two times together. So just keep that in mind and keep us in your prayers as well as we go through these treatments. It's going to be a couple more months yet that we're doing this. So just so you're aware. That's why I'm not slacking off. I'm just trying to get everything done that needs to be done, which also includes treatments for our grandson. Okay, so what do we have going here? We have a story that actually we looked at back in July, right around the 4th of July, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was a story that came from the book of 2 Kings. And I want to know which prophet that this story involves. It involves a healing from leprosy. So which prophet is the one that was involved with this healing? Was it Samuel? Was it Elijah? Was it Elisha? Or was it Naaman? Okay, which prophet was it? Samuel, Elijah, Elisha, or Naaman? The answer is not Naaman, because Naaman is the person who ends up being healed of leprosy in the story. It's not Samuel, because that's a little bit earlier. It's not Elijah, it's Elisha. All right, so now Elisha has become this sort of folk hero in Israel. And he's done some pretty awesome things following in the footsteps of Elijah. And okay, you have to set the scene a little bit. You might recall there's this war going on. It's not really a war, it's just skirmishes that are ongoing all the time between Israel and a neighbor called Aram. And in one of the little phrase that they had, Naaman, who's the general of the Aramean country, comes in and beats up on Israel and carries off some captives, some slaves, to go back home along with a bunch of booty. Okay, so he got all that, and so there's tensions between Aram and Israel. Well, Naaman, being the general who's the hero out there who keeps beating up on Israel along with a few other nations that surround them, he's got leprosy. And it's affecting his duties in the battlefield, but also he's a hero and people like him, and they don't want him to die of leprosy. They don't want him to have to suffer like that the rest of his life. And it just so happens, this is the cool part of the story, there's an unnamed hero in the story. The unnamed hero is the servant girl who had been captured in Israel and taken back and made to be the servant girl to Naaman's wife. She feels pity for him in her heart. And she says, hey, I know this guy. I know this great prophet in Israel. I know who he is, and he can heal Naaman. She didn't have to say that. She could have kept it to herself. Think about that. She could have kept it to herself. And instead, she says, hey, I know what you can do. You got to visit this guy. I know you guys, I know there's this thing between our two countries, but he will heal Naaman. So the wife passes it on to Naaman. Naaman goes to the king. The king says, hey, all right, I'll send a letter off to the king of Israel, and we'll get things done for you. I'll ask that he would heal him, and I'll even send a lot of money and stuff along just to show that I mean business with this. Well, as the story goes, the king of Israel gets this letter and sees all this money coming and says, this is a trap. He's trying to sucker me in and then give me a real blow to the right just when I'm not looking. No, and he tears his clothes because he knows this is the end. Now the king's of Aram's just going to come in and wipe him out. And Elisha hears about this, And what his servant hears about it and goes to Elisha and says, hey, this is what happened with the king. And Elisha says, hey, just tell the king to send this Naaman guy over to me. I'll take care of everything. I'll take care of it. Tell him not to worry. So that's exactly what happens. Naaman goes. You can almost imagine Naaman riding up in his horse, all the glitz and glamour, the money, the power with all the horses and things like that, the chariots, who knows what he had. And he drives up to Naaman's house and sends out a servant to knock on the door and hey, Naaman's here for the healing. And Elisha never comes out to see him. Did you notice that? He never comes out to see him. He just sends word out, hey, go dip in the Jordan River 7 times and you'll be healed. And that infuriates Naaman. You don't talk to me like that. I'm the one in charge here. Hey, I've come here. Now, I brought all this stuff from the king. You need to heal me. And he's sulking. In fact, he goes back home. And this is when it looks like, uh-oh. Well, he starts to go back home, let's put it that way. And all of his servants get around him and say, look, if he told you to do something crazy like jump off a cliff, would you have done it? No. Well, maybe, yeah. So how come, why not just something as simple as jumping into the river 7 times? Come on, just do it. He does it. He's healed. He's happy. And you would think it's a happily ever after story. Well, it sort of is. But think about this. Who are the heroes in this story? Number one, it's the servant girl who had been captured in Israel, a Jewish girl who had been taken back to Aram. She's the real unnamed hero whose heart was so full of the love for Yahweh that she stepped across all these political and, all these boundaries of hatred. And she should have wanted to get even with Naaman, but she didn't. Her love for Yahweh was something that now became love for Naaman in the midst of his misery. Isn't that interesting? I wonder how much our love for our enemies becomes apparent that way. Probably not so often. Probably not all that often. Not as often as it should. So that's an interesting thing in this story. And also Naaman's own servants themselves who convinced him, hey, just do it. Just do what this man says. Okay, so that's part 1 of the story. And part 2 of the story that we get this week that wasn't part of the lectionary reading, the alternate lectionary reading back there in July, is the very last verse. Then he, talking about Naaman, returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Please accept the present from your servant. See, now he recognized that Yahweh is the best God that there is out there. He still went back and worshiped his own God, but Yahweh is it, man, and he knows it. And he wanted to offer him gifts. And as it turns out in the story, Elisha says, no, I'm not accepting anything. This is God's gift to you. I don't need anything. I'm just doing what I'm called to do. So you have that going on in the story. Now, how does that relate to our Mellow Monday when we're looking at the Psalm? Well, the Psalm for this coming Sunday is Psalm 111. It is the beginning of a little short section of Psalms, Psalm 111 through 118, that are the praise Psalms. And they have praise the Lord, praise the Lord, praise the Lord in them. And they're really cool Psalms, because how does Psalm 111 fit in with the story from 2 Kings chapter 5 that we just read? Well, it's all about praise, giving praise and acknowledgement that God is Lord, that God is Lord of the universe. And you have that all over Psalm 111. And this is how it begins. Praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord. How? With my whole heart. And that doesn't mean my emotions. It means my whole inner being, my whole will, my whole mind, all my strength. That's what heart meant in the Older Testament. It's not just this mushy feel good type of feeling that we often associate with our hearts. No, it is your inner will. I'm just gonna shout out this praise, and how am I going to do it? In the company of the upright, in the congregation, within all of us being together. We're going to acknowledge God's love and praise for us together. We're going to confess it to one another, and that's how we build strength as a community. And then you move on to why you do it. Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. And all the way through the psalm, it's 10 verses long, but you read about the reasons why we praise. It's for his redemptive acts, for his provision for us. And as you read all these verses, you realize, talking about the history of Israel, how God has been there all along for the people as they move through their history, through creation, through being redeemed from slavery in Egypt, moving into the promised land. All those things are part of this psalm. So what you have is Psalm 111 through 118. Those psalms were the ones that were used particularly during the festival times in the temple. And you can imagine they were put together in a way that there would be a leader shouting out something and the congregation responding back, and different things like that. So it's kind of a cool reading, and that's how they fit together. That's how Testy Tuesday and Mellow Monday fit together this week. But also recall that our psalm reading and our psalm reading also have a connection to the gospel reading coming up. So be ready on Thursday. No, actually it'll be Friday, First Thoughts on a Friday, when we talk about Jesus and the 10 lepers. There you go. Leprosy, Old Testament reading. Leprosy, gospel reading. Okay, God's blessings be with you. Enjoy your day. It's a nice, cool autumn day here. I'm enjoying it, and hopefully you do too. Blessings be with you.